So I just want to talk a little bit about this panel and let you know what was on my mind when I created it and when I sent out invitations to ask these people to speak at our conference. There are certain subjects that are in the newspaper every day, and that's great. They're very important, and they should be. And there are certain subjects that somehow the normal, smart, intelligent people that I know do not seem to think about, they don't seem to talk about, they don't seem very concerned. And I understand it, subjects like chemicals and pesticides and soil and water and GMOs, they don't seem day to day to be that big a deal. But when you hear these people speak in person, on video, when you read their books, you feel outraged that this is not being dealt with. In other words, adults in society are responsible for the future. We're responsible for the children. Some people say, I don't like bad news, I don't want anything that's negative, and neither do I, but I'm a 55-year-old man. There are children in this world, including my own. I am not supposed to put my head in the sand and avoid things. I'd much rather avoid it if I could, but I can't. There's realities going on, and we as adults are responsible to understand and learn what the truth is, and then take consistent, significant action in our own lives, in the people we elect, and some of the things that are being discussed have tremendous implications on us and on the future. I listen to each of these people speak, and whether we're talking about the GMOs and the future of that industry, or what's going on with pesticides and chemicals, or how we're treating the land, the soil, the environment, the water, the forests, the coral reefs, the ocean acidification, the species extinction, it goes on and on. It is really important things that I am praying that someone says, wait a minute, this is outrageous. I am hoping you will be completely outraged that people in our society who are responsible are, instead of taking care of these urgent issues, they're saying, I am going to be more concerned with how it affects the economy and businesses. And it's great to take care of the economy and businesses. I'm a pro-business person. I'm not a liberal person. I'm pro-business. I like business. But it is completely outrageous if people in positions of authority are not telling us the truth and intentionally doing things that will cause us diseases, death for us, for the future, for our children, our planet. I don't know of people who are better at explaining this than the people on this panel. They have written books, they've devoted their time, and for whatever their reasons are, they have written about this. They've chosen to make this a priority, and I am very, very grateful to them. I appreciate that they have done this, and I really when we have this conference, I know people love the nutrition stuff, they love the vegan versus the Atkins stuff, but the stuff that's being talked about here was urgent in 1970. It's 2018. I am praying that people will hear it, will listen, and will use all their abilities to try to make a difference in this. So, although I have been the moderator of all the panels, for this one panel, I have asked if Jeffrey Smith would be, due to his knowledge, would take it over, ask the questions, and participate on it. And I am very grateful, and I am going to turn it over to Jeffrey. And once again, just while I have you on stage, I want to thank each of you for writing a book. I want to thank you, Vandana, for all the work you've done, the videos, everything. I'm really grateful for what all of you do. Thank you.
And thank you, Stephen. And Stephen has allowed me to be the moderator, but he has handed me his 100 questions. Literally 100 questions. We'll just put that over here. Okay. So each of us are going to have already spoken or will speak and give our whole presentation. So I know that I spent years, 23 years, studying this issue, and what we give out in our introductory lectures is less than 1% of 1% of what we know. So I like panels to be an opportunity to speak on areas that we don't normally speak on, to go deep in areas or personal in areas or bring out our wisdom. And so I want to start the panel by asking, first of all, Vandana, you traveled the longest to get here, so you get to go first. And I'd like you to answer this question. Just start the thing as, I am passionate about, and then fill the rest of that, whatever that is, I am passionate about, something we get to know you better about, and then finish by saying, and the one thing I want you to know is. So, I'm forcing the distilling of the information. I'm passionate about blank, and the one thing I want you to know at the end of your passionate speech is blank. You may go anytime.
That makes my mind go blank.
Yes, Vandana is one of the most articulate speakers on the planet, and I just scripted her. So, my
I won't follow the script.
That's fine.
I will mention why I work on food and agriculture. It isn't the field of my training. I trained in physics. I did a Ph.D. on the foundations of quantum theory. And I really got involved with looking at agriculture because in the year 1984, there were two disasters that hit India. In the summer of 1984, and it's interesting, Orwell chose that year for his amazing book. And I don't know how many of you are aware that George Orwell was born in India. The place in Champaran, in Motihari, where Gandhi did his first satyagraha against the forced cultivation of indigo. Gandhi returned from South Africa in 1915. And by 1917, he'd been called by the movement that was fighting the forced cultivation of indigo. Now, indigo at that time was so valuable that a bag full of indigo used to be exchanged for a bag of gold. And so, of course, once the British had taken control, they wanted to control indigo and expand the name of the place, Champaran, actually means the land of the forest of the champa flower. It used to be a forest. And now farmers and peasants were being forced to grow indigo under slave conditions. The entire cotton empire was based on slavery. And last year I did a pilgrimage for freedom because it was 100 years of Gandhi's Champaran Satyagraha. The word Satyagraha is derived from Satya, truth, Agrah, force, the force of truth. And that's what I'm passionate about. Both the truth, but the force of truth when truth is violated systemically. And I realized in 1984 that what we'd been told about the story of industrial agriculture, something was wrong with the narrative. So 4th of June, Punjab, the land where the Green Revolution, which is the name of the chemical agriculture introduced to the Third World, the Green Revolution was given a Nobel Peace Prize to Norman Borlaug, who introduced the chemical farming to places like Mexico and India. And he, interestingly, had come from DuPont Defense Labs to start the research. And it's not an accident that he came from Defense Labs because agrochemicals came from Hitler's Germany. Since many of you raised your eyebrows on that, may I go a little
Please,
longer?
Absolutely.
And I found this out in my research on the Green Revolution in Punjab. I was working for the United Nations University those days, and I said, something is funny, and I must look. By 2nd of November, a second disaster had hit India, which is a leak of a pesticide plant, owned then by Union Carbide, now by Dow, which has merged with DuPont. So I realized in this research I did for the United Nations University that the chemicals had actually, all agrochemicals have their origins in Hitler's Germany. Fertilizers, about which I don't think anyone who's worried about eating even thinks about chemical fertilizers as a problem. But they are. First of all, they were made in the same factories that made the ammunitions and the explosives. That's why so often you will hear about fertilizer bombs. Afghanistan is full of fertilizer bombs because to deal with the Soviets, the Americans gave sacks and sacks and sacks of urea. So today you have ready-made explosive material everywhere with the Taliban. And the violence doesn't stop. But the pesticides have their origins in the chemicals designed to kill people in concentration camps, beginning with Xylon B. Now, the companies that started to make it were tried for genocide in the Nuremberg trials. They were called, what was their name in Germany?
LG Farben.
IG Farben. And interestingly, Standard Oil and IG Farben had partnerships. Monsanto and Bayer had Mobe. They were all partnerships. So the American side and the German side were all working together. And Bayer was given the job, work out a way to kill all these millions. And when Bhopal happened, the women of Bhopal said they've turned us into a gas chamber. They didn't know too much of the history of where the chemical fertilizers, pesticides come. And then herbicides, the big one was Agent Orange, used in the Vietnam War. So all chemicals in farming are a continuation of war after war ended. And all makers of chemicals for agriculture are nothing more than criminals making poisons to kill people. Then they say it'll kill insects, but it's still killing people. And you have written so much about this and the whole Monsanto story. So my passion for truth really made me look at, if the Peace Prize went to the Green Revolution and the land where I did my MSc honors in particle physics, which was a peaceful land of Punjab, was now a land of war, what went wrong? And I realized what went wrong is that war, chemicals, entered food. And for so long, we've been prevented from knowing this. I know when I wrote my book, it was the first book on the ecology of agriculture, of chemical farming. So I'd get invited. I'd get invited, and the next day I'd get a disinvite saying, our board said if you get called, then our funding would stop. So from 80s onwards, I've seen how so much funding in food and agriculture is dependent on the very people who are destroying the planet and our health. Mm-hmm. And so the second passion I have is freedom. Work with less, but do it freely. And all science, the true science of today, is only coming out of places where, with very little resources, people like Eric Cervellini did that first study on GMOs and glyphosate. And not only, this is what the whole Monsanto papers have revealed, not only do they finance fake research, they spend a lot of money drowning real research. And so my familiarity with these corporations has really been, the poor Sicilian peasants dealing with the mafia. It's basically having to deal with the mafia, which can change your laws. I have done a lot of work on the pharmaceuticals in India. First, they attacked me for it. They troll me. And when I continue to speak, they've just managed to get 2 years ago our government to shut down the data on pharmaceuticals, as if the suicides will go away if governments don't count. But then we go to the regions, we actually go to the communities, and we spend time, find out the problem, but more importantly, offer the alternative. My third passion is nonviolence, from Gandhi's Ahimsa. And I feel so happy that with the suicides, we started to work on organic cotton. I began my work with seeds for food. just was in with her by the capital of BT cotton and the capital of suicide. In the villages where we are working, the BT cotton GMO is down 60%. And we are going to keep working till it's zero. And each of us have to get rid of the GMOs in our farming systems and our food, and we have to get rid of the chemicals which have been brought by the same companies that bring us the GMOs. And I heard a talk in the morning. I mean, you are in a country where every big problem that is of these created by the global giants, they've been very successful in this country to turn it into your private problem and for you to find your private solution. And of course, responsibility is a very important part. But when it's criminal giants ruling our food and agriculture systems, solidarity has to be the other part, and our global citizenship, our planetary citizenship. We can't imagine that a few % of the people shifting to better diets is going to save the planet or people elsewhere. This is both a collective right and a collective responsibility.
Thank you, Vandana. Carey.
I'm up, huh?
Yeah, yes.
Everything she said. No, so I'm passionate. I was going to say truth, but you took it, so I'm going to say...
It never gets taken away. Just gets multiplied.
As a journalist, I've been a journalist for 30 years, and so truth is foundational to what I do. Truth and transparency is what the foundation of everything that you pursue as a journalist. And I became part of this conversation about food and agriculture about 20 years ago. And as part of covering this for Reuters, I started learning about GMOs, learning about the pesticides that were being used in agriculture, studying the science, meeting with a whole host of different people, from farmers to the CEOs of very powerful corporations. And what led me to write the book, and what led me to where I am today speaking to you, is because what I was learning and what I was seeing and what I was beginning to understand, which was very, very frightening, was information was really hard to get, that was not out there for the general public to see. Information about the science that shows the very harmful impacts of pesticides in our food, pesticides on human health, pesticide impacts on environmental health. All of this information that's out there and that's important to our future generations was being hidden, was being suppressed, and scientists who were trying to bring this information to light were being harassed and discredited and trolled, as you say. And I'm most passionate, above all else, about children, about my own children, about your children, about my children's future children. I think as caring, responsible, people, citizens of this world, we need to be sure that we are creating a world, for our children to experience and to live in, and it needs to be as healthy and sustainable as it can be. We don't want to be leaving a world for our children to be sick in and to suffer and to endure disease and pain and early death. But that's what we're doing. That's what we're creating with this toxic environment. And there are many factors other than pesticides, certainly, that contribute to disease, that contribute to cancers and other forms of disease, and infertility and reproductive problems and ADHD and autism and all of these neurodevelopmental things that we're seeing in our children today. There are other aspects to it than pesticides, sure, but pesticides are part of it. They are a problem. And what I've seen in my research, and I spoke about this the other day, is it's very, very clear. If you look at where we were 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and you look at where we are today, we have created a pervasive pesticide-dependent food system. And the main beneficiaries of this are a handful of giant corporations who are counting billions of dollars in profits while we are all getting sicker. And that's the truth. That's what the documents show us. That's what they don't want us to know. So I'm passionate about children. If there's one thing, what's the rule here? What are you trying to say? If there's one thing I want you to remember,
To know.
one key point you take away, is our only defense, our only means to creating a healthier future is education. Is we have to be informed, we have to be educated, and it's not an easy task. It's not easy to get there because there are very powerful forces. They're trying to control the narrative, they're trying to control the science, they're trying to control the regulators, the lawmakers, they're trying to confuse consumers and farmers and others about what is true, about the safety of their products and the risks associated with them. So, you all are doing the work right here. You're here. You're learning. You're sharing what you know. You're listening to us, so this is really important. And I guess that's the one takeaway: is we just need to continue to learn and to educate ourselves and try to share the information with others. So hopefully we can do something about it for our kids.
And Kaitlyn.
Wait a minute. Wait, how about you first?
No. I'm the moderator.
We've got truth, children, nonviolence. Freedom. There's nothing else for me to say. My cat. Let's see. To try to say something that, because I agree with everything that's been said before me, I'll try to say something that's different. When I was working on Modified, before I even started working on it, I published a piece in Elle magazine called The Bad Seed that was about GMO corn, and it went viral, and I got a lot of blowback from the industry, from Big Ag, and it was the same week that they were trying to destroy my career as a writer. I'd already published 2 books, and I was reluctant, honestly, to write about agriculture, completely reluctant, and I'll tell you more about that. But that same week that piece came out, I had editors calling me from all of the biggest publishing houses in New York asking me to write a book on the same subject. And I turned a lot of them down, but it was a completely bipolar week because I had these hired journalist hacks from Monsanto and other places who were trying to destroy my career at the same time that I had these editors calling, trying to lift up my career. And I was so rattled by the whole thing. But I ended up agreeing to write a book with one editor. Lots of them wanted me to have a smoking gun. They wanted me to be able to write something that would say GMOs are bad and because of X, and that I was able to uncover this one sort of amazing truth. And I didn't know that we were there yet, or that I was the person to find that. I'm a mother and a storyteller. I've written about divorce and the recession. I've written fiction. And I like great stories, but I'm not necessarily an activist by any stretch. And I never considered myself to be an activist. I feel passionately and I feel deeply, but I don't hook on to an idea and become the spokesperson for it. That's just not who I am. And I write for a lot of different publications, the New York Times. I worked for NPR for a long time, and part of my job was always to walk a middle line and ask the same balanced questions of both sides. At any rate, when I signed on to do this book, the editor I spoke with, that I finally went with after I had turned down, 10 or 12 people, was, I said to her, well, I'm willing to go out there and have a journey, and I'm willing to ask some questions, but I don't know where we're going to end up. I may have no answers by the end. And she said, that's okay. Where do you want to go? And I said, well, I've got a list. And she said, great. And then at the end of that phone call, she said, Kaitlyn, are you scared? And I said, well, I wasn't until you said anything. So what I will say that I'm passionate about, what I realized I became incredibly passionate is kind of the wrong word. But I remember I drove across the Great Plains. I live in Maine, and I have 2 little kids. At that time, I didn't have the second child yet. I decided to do that and the book on science at the same time. That seemed like a wise choice. But I flew out to Denver, and I drove across the Great Plains by myself. And I listened to Ryan Adams the whole time and Lucinda Williams, and it was great. And I got to see America from the ground, and I got to see what Michael Pollan talked about, those corn cities where the corn is planted right up to the side of the road, where Jeffrey lives. And I remember at the end of that trip, after I had driven across all of that, getting on an airplane and going up in the plane and looking down at the sloughs, which are like little ponds that were glittering like jewels. And the sun was hitting them, and the corn everywhere, and maybe in the far distance one tree, maybe a second tree, probably not. And my heart just broke. My heart just broke as a mom, as a person on this planet, all of the wetlands that have been filled in, maybe left like, a 5-foot patch, a wetland reclamation area. And I thought, what have we done? Who did this? Why did we let this happen? And the burden, I realized, was on all of us. We let this happen. We did this. I did this. And so I think that what's become the thing for me is not so much the GMO necessarily, and certainly, of course, the pesticides and the toxins were pounding into the environment, but just the enormity of the problem, how layered it is, how much money is being made, how much power there is involved in this, and how serious the situation is. And I can't tell you how many nights I go to bed, and as I said, I have 2 small children, one 10 and one 4, and I sleep with the curtains open so that I can see the moon and the stars, and the moon often wakes me up at night. And I just lie there and I think, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna roll this back? And so passion might not be the right word for what I feel, but the environmental situation we're in is so serious, it's gonna take all feet on the ground, all hands at the table, and we've got a lot of work to do. And it's not just GMOs, it's pesticides, it's not just that, it's oil, it's not just oil, it's the lack of nutrients in our soil, it's not just the air, it's our water. I mean, you get to one and you start to work on it, and then you realize there are 15 more. There's plastic, there's petroleum products, there's, I could enumerate them all. So that's where I am. And thank you for the things that you both said. Appreciate it.
I am passionate about protecting the earth from what could be a replacement of nature in this generation. With the inexpensive gene editing and GMOs out there, we are seeing a gold rush against the genome. And if we don't stop it, then all future generations will inherit the folly of this generation, a nature replaced with a vision from Monsanto and Bayer. And there's no technology today to clean that up. But the thing that I want you to know, and I'm also passionate about, is that we can champion this and other causes. And we can take an attitude and choose the attitude to not be the victim, but be the victor. So that we get to choose what we consider food and not have it dictated to us by Monsanto Bayer and their enforcement wing in Washington. We get to choose and we get to create. There has been a suppression and oppression of personal freedom and responsibility such that the lack of taking responsibility is the epidemic. And the antidote is personal development, freedom, taking responsibility, and I say we can do this with great joy and hope, and spread that with the message. That's an inspiring message, and that we can protect the world and transform it.